Right, so there are so many debates going on in the world right now. We've got Brexit, we've got Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster. Does jam or cream come on a scone first? And today we're going to answer one of those important debates. Does a raw wedge spin more than a regular wedge? There's lots of debate on this. Some people think yes, some people think no. Today we're going to find out what really spins the most. Here we do have some very, very interesting data. So I'm quite surprised, to be fair, dipping it in the water every single shot. I'm thinking myself, maybe that's going to be very beneficial for me because, okay, so all jokes aside, this is actually quite a big debate in the game of golf right now. Raw wedges have been, around for a number of years, but really the last 1-2 years, they've had a big tour presence and a big marketing push, to be honest. And the belief is that raw wedges will spin more, and I can completely understand that because you think more friction that you have on the club, then the more spin the ball is going to have. So it makes perfect sense, but does it actually do anything? Is it a marketing gimmick? That's what I want to find out, and I've never fully tested it properly. I've never owned a raw wedge before. This isn't mine, this is my girlfriend's brother's, but I've never had one, and maybe, should I need one? Would I get more spin around the greens? You know, I play in Cornwall a lot of the time, links, hard ground. If I can get a bit more spin on my wedges, that could make a big difference. So we're going to use GC Quad today to find out whether it is true. I've got two different wedges here that you'll see on the screen. I've got a TaylorMade 54 degree in the raw finish, milled grind. And then I've got a Glide 54 degree in just a normal black finish, no rawness to it. So we're going to use GC Quad, as I said. We're going to hit a load of shots with each, and we're going to find out if, there is any more spin with a raw wedge, and whether I should be using it, and whether actually all you guys should be using it as well. We need to gain as much help as we can. Should a raw wedge be our go-to? Okay, so as I said earlier, I'm going to use GC Quad to capture some data, and here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to hit 3 different shot styles. So I'm going to hit my half swing, 3/4 swing, and full swing. And we're going to hit maybe 10, 20 with each on each club. And we're going to look at the spin numbers. I'll show you. And then we're going to do some other tests to see, in different scenarios, what a raw wedge might help you with. Oh, and I'm using TaylorMade TP5, so fairly soft ball. Okay, that was the data caught with my half swing 54 without the raw finish. Now, I was trying to hit that shot around 60 yards, okay? And we can see the average was 60 yards, so pretty good. So if we look on the backspin, I had a couple of dud ones, so 4,900 and another 4,600. So those were 2 not great ones. If I take them out, and I'll do the same if that happens with the raw, I averaged a total of 8,500 revs of spin. Now, pretty good, that's fairly spinny for a short shot, and I was fairly accurate in terms of my distance control. I averaged 60 yards, which is what I wanted. Had a bit of side spin to the right, which is what I like. I like to hit a little fade with my wedges. So that's a benchmark. That's our half swing with a 54, a normal wedge, no rawness to it, 8,500 revs of spin. So now we're going to need to test out the raw wedge. Okay, that's another 15 shots done with the raw 54. So let's take a look at the data together with GC Quad. So again, trying to average around 60 yards. My odds were a bit off with that club. I felt like I wasn't so good with it, probably because it's not my own. But I did average 59 yards, so my average was pretty much around 60. And my spin, if I take away, a couple of the lower ones, I didn't have any in the 4,000 revs, so that's a good one from the ping. But if I take 2 of the worst ones out to make it fair, so there's a 5,201 there, and a 5,901 there. So if I take 2 bad ones out, which I did with the ping, I'm averaging 7,200 revs. The ping 54 was 8.5, taking out 2 bad ones. If I leave both bad ones in, so leave the ping 2 bad ones in and the TaylorMade, I'm averaging 7,000 with the TaylorMade and 8,000 with the ping. So I'm quite surprised, to be fair. The half swings, I'm seeing more spin from my ping. Now, I have cleaned both clubs as best I can. I've made sure I've wiped them each shot, I've wiped the ball each shot to make it fair. But I'm seeing more spin at the moment with the half shots anyway, with the ping as opposed to the raw wedge. Okay, so we're moving back to the ping 54 now. I'm going to hit 80-yard shots, so 80 to 85-yard shots, hit kind of 10, 15, do the same with the raw and compare the spin again. But an interesting first test, I didn't expect that to happen. Okay, so the 80-yard shots, they're done with the ping wedge. Let's have a look at the data together. So I was averaging 78 yards of carry, and if we look at the spin, I was averaging 7,900 revs. Now, weirdly, that's less than the half shots, but what you've got to remember, I've got quite a lot of surface moisture on the mat, so there's quite a lot of water getting in behind the ball and the club face, so spins are going to be very, very up and down. But however, you might say to me, Jamie, that's stupid, because how can we know if this is a correct test? If you're on a golf course, you're never going to have a perfect lie. There's always going to be a bit of water probably when you're playing. There's always going to be a bit of mud on the ball. There's always going to be a bit of grass in the way. You're never going to have the same lie every time. So actually this bit of moisture is telling me, you know, what would actually happen on the golf course. You don't want to have the perfect lie, perfect dry conditions every time, because we know that's not actually going to happen on the course. So it's going to be up and down, but that is how good the wedge is. You know, if it's very, very spinny or a very good wedge, it's going to be easy to control those not strike points, those spin numbers. My strikes there, I would have said, were pretty good, to be honest. So we averaged 7,900 revs, got up to 10,000. Now again, if I take out maybe two of the worst ones, like I have done previous, we've got a couple in the 5,000 rev area where I probably caught a little bit high off the face, or there was a lot of moisture in between club and ball, so it shot up a bit higher and had less spin. You can see in both of those there, one launched at 36 degrees, the other launched at 35 or 34.9. So launching high with less spin, probably half the face or a bit of moisture in between. And that's going to happen on the golf course. You're never going to be able to control your strike or your spin that well, okay? But we average, taking those two out, 8,200 revs. So we're going to get the raw wedge back out, hit the same sort of shots and see what happens. Okay, so some interesting numbers there. Finished off the shots with the raw 54 degree, average 76 yards, so I'm a bit out on my yardages, but the ping average 77, so they're both very similar. Now, on an average, the raw wedge spun at 8,000 revs. Now again, if I do the same as I did with the ping, and I take out two of the worst ones, we've got one just under 7,000, then the worst one after that is 7,400. So to be honest, there weren't really any bad ones, but if I take out the worst two, it won't make much of a difference to the average. No, it's added 200 revs onto it, so pretty much the same. If I put in the two worst ones that I took out from both areas, the ping was 7,900 revs and the TaylorMade was 8,085. That's not a lot, is it? To be honest, that's not an unbelievable amount of spin that you would go and spend more money on the raw wedge on, to be honest. However, what I will say is I found that the spin numbers were more consistent with the raw wedge. So have a look at this. My highest spin with the raw wedge was 9,439 revs, okay? The lowest was 6,900. Okay, so what's that? Just over 2,000 revs from top to bottom. Yeah, so that's pretty consistent. Now, if I go to the ping, my best with the ping was 10,122 revs of spin. So actually more spin than the raw. However, the least amount of revs was 5,500. So nearly a 4,500 rev difference from top to bottom. And I found that hitting shots, definitely the first few with the raw, I felt like they were very similar spins, you know, around the 8,000, 8,500 mark. Whereas with the ping, it was always high to low, then low to high. I felt like it wasn't as consistent. So potentially, because I've got a bit of surface moisture on the mat, maybe in wet conditions, I would not say that the raw wedge spins more. That's not what I found. It doesn't spin more. But I would suggest that the spin numbers are more consistent. They're closer together. And that is more important in my mind than how much spin you can create. If you can create the same amount of spin, then you're going to know where to land each shot. Does that make sense? So if you're chipping, wedge playing, whatever it needs to be, you're going to be able to predict the roll. Yeah, as long as you know the greens. If you can control your spin numbers, that's more beneficial than actually how much can I spin it. And I found the raw wedge was better at that than the ping. Right, final test we're going to do, and we're going to see what happens to each wedge when they are dunked in water. Now, a lot of the time, especially if you play golf in England, the grass is wet. So a lot of the time you're going to get water in between ball and grooves, and we need to see what happens. Now, a lot of the time it will just make the ball spin less, we know that, but does a raw wedge make a big difference when it's really wet? I found a little bit there that the spins were a bit more controllable. I wouldn't say it spun more though in fairly dry conditions. The mat's a little bit wet, but this is going to be the real test. This is going to be proper wet. Club's going to be wet, ball's going to be wet. Each time I'm going to soak them, and we're going to see, you know, if the raw wedge makes a difference. At the moment, I'm not saying that the raw wedge spins more. I say the spin is more controllable, but it definitely doesn't spin more. Will it make a big difference when it's proper wet? Let's find out. So the shot's done there with the 54 again, trying to hit about 80 yards, dunking it in the glass of water every single shot. Now, look straight away, the spin has dropped off significantly. We're now on 5,381 revs, as opposed to before with this 3/4 shot at about 8,000. So we've lost a number of revs there. Big difference as well, the launch angle has just jumped up. So that's with that surface water hitting the ball. We're launching it now at 36 degrees, whereas with before we were 31. So we're 5 degrees higher with less spin. And that made it really difficult for me to control the distances. Look at my carry. I averaged 79 yards, but my highest was 89, my lowest was 72. So I found it really difficult because at the start, I thought I was hitting it so soft, but because it was launching high with less spin, it was going further. So I had to dial in what I thought was my 80-yard shot, but actually it felt like almost my 60, just because the spin was so low, so it was shooting forwards. So yeah, we're averaging 5,381 revs. That's what I expected, more water between club face and ball, less spin, high launch. And we're going to see if the raw wedge can make any improvements to that. A bit more spin and easier to control ball flight in terms of launch and distance. That would be a game changer in my opinion, rather than looking at so much spin. If it can be more controlled, then happy days, I'd go and get one now. Okay, so we do have some very, very interesting data to have a look at. So that was with the 54 raw wedge, dipping it in the water every single shot. I averaged 77 yards of carry. I was trying to average 80, averaged 79 with the ping. Now, if you look at the spin, I averaged 7,600 revs. So that's an extra just over 2,000 revs more than what the ping was. And what I would say is I found that I was much more in control of this wedge in terms of distance. My distances were much more, much closer together. I felt like I wasn't having to hit it softer than my normal 80-yard feel where I was with the ping. Now, again, I talked about launch angle earlier. The ping was launching much higher, so 36 degrees and spinning less, which was why I was struggling to control the distance. The raw wedge was launching at 31.9, so 32 degrees, so 4 degrees less than what the ping was. Again, more similar to what I was used to before. So the 54 raw, when it was dry-ish, was averaging 30.9. So actually, when it was dunking and super wet every time, it was only launching 1 degree more. The ping, when it was dunked every time, was averaging 5 degrees higher, with over 2,000 revs less of spin. So that is very, very interesting. So that concludes this test. Very, very interesting. Glad I did that and glad I could share it with you guys. So what I found, when it's dry and it's short shots, so anything kind of inside 80 yards or 60 yards dry, I don't see any difference with a raw wedge. I don't think it gives you any more spin. I don't think you're going to see any more spin. So things like chipping around the greens, little pitch shots, in my opinion, a raw wedge isn't giving you more spin. However, the benefits to having a raw wedge, if you play in wet conditions, you are going to see much more control in terms of distance control. The launch angle is going to be easier to control, and you will get more spin with a raw wedge in very wet conditions. The ping, you know, actually spun a bit more in the shorter shots with dry, but when it started to get wet, that spin really dropped off. With the raw wedge, when it got wet, the shots that it was producing weren't much different to when it was dry. So for me, if you play in wet conditions a lot, maybe here in the UK, especially Cornwall, a raw wedge might be beneficial for you. And to be honest, I'm thinking myself, maybe that's going to be very beneficial for me, because I really found when I got this ping wedge wet, like really wet, I was really struggling to control distance. With this one, with the raw, I felt very, very easy. So very, very interesting test. I hope that answered questions. I hope you enjoyed that. Any other questions that you have about these wedges, please put them in the comments below and I'll try and answer them as best I can. But yeah, an interesting test. Hope I've given you guys a bit more knowledge on that subject, and maybe, you know, it's time to go and buy a raw wedge. You know, I feel like it could be beneficial, especially if you play in lots of wet conditions. So thanks very much for watching, guys. Please remember to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel. I'm hoping to produce more content as the year goes on, and the more subscribers I get, the more likes I get, the more I'm going to be able to do that. So thanks very much for watching again, and I will see you all in the next one.